Hello there, welcome back to the Closet Historian. Today on my summer sewing series, as summer is winding down, I'm also winding down on my list of projects, and today it is going to be the 1950s inspired cotton sateen dress in this tan and white sort of fern digital print. And actually, if you look up close on this print, you can kind of tell it's sort of pixelated almost, so it's not even a very super high quality digital print. From far away, you can't really tell, but you know, it'll be our secret that this print is a little bit pixelated if you get right up and close like that. But I really do like this fabric. It's just that perfect mix of like tropical print, which we know I like, but with no weird birds or animals, check. And then it's two very neutral colors, so I can pair this with red in the future, with navy, with black, with white, all kinds of different colors. So that's always nice. You know how I love me some versatility here on this channel. So I'm going to be making a 1950s inspired dress out of this. Just a very slight, simple little like all-in-one kimono sleeve, similar to the one we did in my last video in this series. I'll put a card up to that if you're curious how to draft a kimono sleeve out of the basic bodice block or add one onto your bodice block, because that's something I did in my last video that I will be utilizing in this one as well. And then this dress, unlike any of the other ones we've done so far, has a very full skirt. So this is going to have a full circle skirt, so I will show you how I draft a pattern for a circle skirt for this as well. And that circle skirt pattern you can use for a dress by attaching it to a bodice like this, or a circle skirt like this can be used just as to make a skirt. Just put a waistband on there instead of a bodice and you've got yourself a skirt. But so we'll be doing a couple of little pattern tweaks to the bodice today. Not as much bodice modification today, but more drafting a skirt from scratch. So I'll have that sort of pattern stuff here at the front of the video as usual, and then I'll show you how I sewed this dress, a little bit of a tutorial on how to do a fun little pocket if you'd like. I haven't really decided if I want to put the pockets on this dress or not. I put it in my original design, but I think they kind of get lost in this busy print. So you'll have to let me know if you think the pockets work or not, or if I should add them or not. But anyway, let's just jump on in and I'll show you how I made the pattern for this design. All right, everyone, today we are making this little 50s sort of dress here. I've decided to go really simple with the bodice and just do the same sort of kimono sleeve bodice that we made during my last video. I'll put a card up to that video showing how we did the kimono sleeve. I'm just actually going to shorten the sleeve a little bit for this dress from the standard one, the pink card version we made last time of that basic kimono sleeve block pattern. I'm going to shorten the sleeve a little bit, and then I'm just going to change the standard high neckline into one of these little swoopy necklines that I do. A lot of the time, I get a lot of questions about this neckline. People are always asking me for the pattern whenever I'm wearing something that has this neckline. I have shown here on the channel how to change necklines before, but I will just go over it again today and show you how I'm going to make this bodice pattern, which is just, you know, shortening the sleeves a little bit and then changing the neckline to this sort of boat neck slash sweetheart slash swoopy curly little neckline. So I'm going to be doing that neckline. Not very much modification going on with the top of the pattern today, but I do have this circle skirt pattern that is well used. I've been using it for years. The paper is kind of cracking apart a little bit now because it's just old, stiff, sad paper. So I will be showing you today how to make a circle skirt pattern with your waist measurement and knowing how long you want it, basically. So I'm going to be drafting a new circle skirt pattern to use for this dress, and then I am going to be doing pockets on this dress. I'm hoping I have some white cotton sateen left over from another project to be able to do contrast like tops on these pockets, but we will have to see if I have any left over. I think I do. If not, I might have some white twill or white cotton of another kind to use for this, because it would be nice to be able to do that little bit of detailing on the pockets. And I'm not exactly sure how big I want the pockets, what exactly I want to do for them, because on a circle skirt they are going to get a little bit lost. But because I have enough fabric to do a full circle skirt, I feel like I should, because I always like doing a circle skirt, because while an A-line looks very nice, and something in between like a half circle skirt looks nice too, you can only wear it as is. Whereas with a circle skirt, I feel like you can wear it without a petticoat, or you can wear it with like a full petticoat underneath and change the look of the dress a little bit. So I feel like being able to do a full circle skirt adds a bit of versatility to a dress. So if I can do a full skirt out of the amount of fabric I have whenever I'm doing a project, and if that's like the direction I want to go in is full skirted, then I do try and do a full circle skirt in order to be able to wear petticoats or not. So I will be doing a full circle skirt with this one, and I will make the pockets essentially, or like make some decisions and make the pockets, and then I will pin them on and kind of move them around and see exactly where I want them before I attach them in any way, basically, is how I will decide on the pockets. And there will be some top stitching on those pockets as well, so that will be a little bit more of a outdoorsy or like safari-ish touch to this dress, because this dress is going to be white and tan and like a leaf print. So it's not completely un-safari-like. As we know, I love me some safari style on this channel, so it's not very unusual for me. But we will start by making the modifications to the bodice, and then I will show you how I make the skirt pattern. Last time I showed how to close that side dart, open it up into the sleeve area to make this sort of rather T-shaped, rather T-shirt shaped almost kimono sleeve bodice pattern. This is the same fit otherwise, the same, everything about this is the same as my basic bodice block with the armhole here. It's just converted to having a kimono sleeve, an all-in-one sleeve like this, whereas of course my standard blocks have, you know, where you would put a set-in sleeve around the armhole, but these have this little extension to create a kimono sleeve. Anyway, I don't know why I'm trying to explain that. You saw this all last video. If you haven't seen that video, go ahead and check it out. And I show you how you make these card versions, the kimono sleeve basic block, basically. So I'm just going to take a trace of this kimono sleeve block front, and then a trace of the kimono sleeve block back. In order to do the modifications we're going to do today, I'm just going to take a little bit of length off the sleeve here, just because the sleeve is a little bit long for this style in my opinion, and then I will change the neckline on the front and back as well to match the sketch that I showed you earlier. And the air conditioner has come on, so sorry about the droning in the background as usual here. So I just, I still have my tracing of the front and my pink version of the front here, but I did grab my 2-dart bodice just to be able to show you something that you may want to do on your pattern. So if I line up the neckline and center front of these two patterns, again, the only thing that's different about these two patterns is that this dart, on the pink one, this dart has been closed and moved in to create the kimono sleeve. That's what we did last time. But something you might want to do is mark on your kimono sleeve block or pattern where the shoulder seam would be, or like the shoulder ends on your regular bodice block. That way you know kind of where the shoulder tip is. So you know from here on, this is now sleeve and not shoulder seam in the same way anymore. So just kind of mark that here, because if you want to take your neckline, let's say you want to make it a wide neckline, you want to know where the end of your shoulder is, so your neckline isn't just like completely off the shoulder, unless you're making something completely off the shoulder, I guess. But you want to know where your shoulder is so you don't come out too far. Like, let's say if you know your bra straps sit around here, you might want to make your neckline not interact with that. Things like that to keep in mind. So I think it's just good to maybe mark on your pattern for your kimono sleeve where the shoulder tip kind of is. And so I've gone ahead and done that on here, and then on my tracing as well, so that when I shorten this sleeve, I know how long I'm making it. If this is the shoulder tip, how long it's hanging down off my shoulder, things like that. So I just think it's a good mark to have on your pattern. Okay, so I have my traced copy here of my kimono sleeve pattern, and I'm just gonna first shorten the sleeve a tiny bit. So if we imagine, again, this is the shoulder point, this is sort of the length of the sleeve at the middle of the sleeve, or from hanging down from the shoulder. And I do want to bring that in just a little bit. The way I'm going to determine how far to shorten it is actually just based off of being able to hem it still. So if we look down here, this is the underarm area of the bodice. So this is the sleeve hem, technically. To be able to, again, you can finish this with a facing, you can finish this with bias tape, you can finish this whatever way you like, or by lining the entire garment. I usually like to just serge this edge and then fold it in, or hem it in, because I find that easiest for me. But in order to do that, I have to have a certain amount of like 90-degree space here, and then hypothetically up here as well, to be able, because if this is at an angle on either of these spots, I won't be able to just fold it in. So I can't bring this side in. If I want to be able to fold it in an inch, I need to have at least an inch of space. So as I start coming in more and more from this side, I start running into the curve here. And so if I were to cut this sleeve here and hem it all the way into there, when I tried to fold this over, I would start running into problems. Even if I did here, and I wanted to fold this, if this was the hem edge here, and I wanted to fold that in on top of this area, it wouldn't fit any longer. So I have to make sure, like here, this ½ inch and this ½ inch, I could easily fold that guy in here to be able to hem this sleeve. I hope that makes some sense. You will get a better idea for this possibly when I do go to hem these sleeves. I will try and remember to explain how I'm doing that. But basically, I need to make sure that I always have at least an inch, if you're watching this pink line here, an inch of space to be able to turn over and hem this. So if I really can only come in a1/4 inch down here. So I'm going to go ahead and come in, put a mark there, 1/4 inch, so that I still have this inch of space to be able to hem it down here. Now up here at the top, you know, you can come in as far as you want, but the more angled this becomes, you can't just turn it in and hem it like that. So basically, I'm going to, if I line up that inch again down here perfectly, we can see that I can take off at least a ½ inch here to shorten my sleeve just a little bit. I do kind of want to come in a little bit farther, but again, once you start getting too angled, it becomes problematic. So I think I'm just going to take off that little bit and just kind of straighten up from this mark here. So basically I'm just going to take off about 5/8 of an inch from the length of the sleeve, which doesn't seem like much, but it's still a little bit, it's just a little bit of a change for this. You can, again, start coming in and doing different things. You just can't hem it the same way. And say it with me, as I always say in this series, I am lazy. I don't want to have to hem this with any other way other than just serging it and turning it in. That's going to be fastest, and I like garments that go from fabric to completed dress as quickly as possible. I don't like doing complex things. You'll probably notice I've never had that criticism leveled at me, but I kind of feel like it's coming, like that I make really quite simple things, and it's very true. It's because I like to go from sketch to something hanging in my closet quickly. I don't like doing really complex sewing projects that take a lot of time. It's just, I guess, my style of sewing. Some people like doing, you know, couture, awesome pin tuck, embroidery, and all kinds of crazy things, but I am a simpleton. I like to just be able to hem and go. So I like quick turnaround on projects. So I am just going to go ahead and hem or shorten this sleeve just this little bit so that I can keep that 90-degree edge along the sleeve hem to be able to just turn it in to hem it. And I will make a small correction up here that I will show you about to again ensure that it's possible. So let me just draw this line, cut off that little extra bit here, and then I'll show you what I have to fix up here to ensure again that that is a 90-degree angle up here and a 90-degree angle down here. Okay, so I've just taken off this little bit from the side here. Again, we still have that 90-degree angle for at least an inch here. And up here, this is actually not perfectly, if I line up the edge of the ruler with the edge of this, you can see it's not a perfect 90-degree angle. So I am just going to tape on some of this and just draw that tiny little wedge in so that this is still a 90-degree angle up here for an inch as well. So we are again here at the top of the sleeve here, and I just want to make sure that this for an inch along, this is the shoulder seam. There's the neckline down in here, technically, but again, past here, this is where it's like the shoulder seam, and past here it's where it's like the center seam of the sleeve, basically, what's hanging off the shoulder. But I want this hem of the sleeve and this shoulder slash sleeve center to be at a 90-degree angle. And in order to do that, I have taped on just that little bit of fabric, lined up my ruler again, made sure I can come in at least an inch, and just kind of added that triangle onto this line here. Because of course this angle perfectly comes down to here. I just need that tiny little bit of extra space. Technically that means this dips down here, but it will not be noticeable because it's so shallow. Just to make sure that this 90-degree angle is maintained, so again I can turn this ½ inch in and hem it without any problems. So those are my adjustments to the sleeve front here, just that little bit here and that little bit in the back. Now of course the sleeve back has to meet up with this, so I am going to just go ahead and lay the top pattern here that we just fixed on top of the tracing of the back pattern piece here. I'm just going to line those up down here at the side seam, mark the difference, put a mark there, and then up here I am going to go ahead and line up from neckline along the shoulder seam again, mark that up here, draw that same little bit of cutoff in, and again straighten out if I have to up here at the top, just like I did for the front. So something interesting I'm discovering here on the kimono back, I went ahead and I came in that 1/4 inch, straightened up to the second mark up here, but I'm noticing instead of having to add on a little bit to the top of this, I'm actually going to have to take off just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and take off, boop, just that little corner to make sure that, again, this is a right angle here at the end. So depending on the angle of your neckline coming out, you may have to add a tiny, tiny wedge, or you may have to take away a tiny, tiny wedge. This on the back, I'm going to be taking it away. To make that flush on the front, I had to add it. Either way, if it's a bigger triangle, something has gone kind of whack, and it will probably still look okay, but if you add too much to the end of this area, like if you, again, you're imagining the shoulder point is here, if you're adding more to this, it's creating a more fluttery, almost like circle-shaped sleeve. So just be careful when you're adding a lot. And again, like you wouldn't want a little triangle like here. You would actually want to just ease that into the whole thing, because that's going to be a lot nicer. But if, as long as it's, you know, I don't know, less than 1/4 of an inch, you should be fine. So again, I'm just going to clip off this tiny, tiny little wedge here, and then my sleeve modifications will be done on both the front and the back. All right, so now that I have shortened my sleeve that little bit, again, we've almost like squared off the pattern even more. So it's just becoming more and more of a funny little block of a pattern. Of course, this huge dart here takes in a lot of fullness and creates that very, I don't know, triangular or like trapezoidal shape. This makes the waist look smaller, in my opinion. Anytime you're widening the shoulder, that's why the 40s did all shoulder pads, because it makes the waist look smaller when you have a triangle pointing into it, and especially if you have a triangle pointing out like this too with the skirt. So this is all kind of adding an illusion. Having a V up here and like a V down here into the waist helps make the waist look smaller, which again, I don't really care like really about, you know, making myself look smaller. It's not something that's on my list of concerns any longer, but I do like that wasp waist, like very nipped in look of the mid-century. So even though I have it's not like my waist is getting actually any smaller, but it's an optical illusion adding to that hourglass silhouette, doing things like this where you have like a kimono sleeve bodice that has this rather straight sleeve area that then when your arm is here, it turns it into a bit of a triangle. So that's kind of why I use this shape, use this kimono sleeve style bodice quite often, is because I do find it quite flattering for me. So, you know, it's a standby for me, even though I like to say I don't really care if something is flattering. I do and I don't, you know. I just have found things that work for me, and I don't really stray from them now. I like them on my shape, I guess. Another thing too is, like, you'll notice I never do like shorter skirts. It's not because like I hate my knees or something. It's just because I find a longer skirt on me, I like it proportionally. I feel like it makes my legs look longer, which I just feel like is a flattering look on me too. So, you know, I do and I don't care about flattering. I don't think there's anyone out there who can say I never care, you know, if something is flattering or not, but I try to not care. I try my best to not care anymore. I think I've come a long way in this regard, which eventually we will touch on here on the channel. But basically that's kind of the principle behind doing a bodice that is like such a trapezoidal shape like this. And you can actually, you know, build shoulder pads into something like this, and then it will be even more structured and have more of that effect. But something I like about kimono sleeve bodices. So anyway, now that the sleeve is done, that's my long-winded way of saying I shortened the sleeve a tiny bit. We are going to draw on a new neckline. So this is like the little curve that is the basic sloper or block pattern neckline. It's basically as close to your neck as you can get without completely choking you. I did actually make a dress last week with just this neckline to see how uncomfortable it is, and it is quite tight. If I were to make a very close neckline again, I think I would still come out like at least another 1/8 of an inch just for a little bit more comfort, because it's just quite restrictive having the whole thing right up on your neck. But anyway, that's what this neckline is here. I am just going to come out maybe like, let's say 2 inches. I don't have a ruler. Where'd my ruler go? This is probably, yeah, it's like 2 1/4 I'm coming out. Again, I like to keep enough space here, down here by the tip of the, if you imagine this is the very tip of the shoulder, my bra strap is probably like right here. And I just like to make sure that I'm not coming out too far. Like even when I do a boat neck, I leave some space here because I just don't want to have to worry about my bra strap showing. So this is a nice healthy amount of space to make sure that doesn't happen. And I do quite like higher necklines, which is again something you'll notice about me. So I don't really mind having this only come out 2 1/4, yeah. And then down from the center front, it's again about 2 1/4 again. So 2 1/4 from each end of the close neckline. I just kind of mark these spots here, and then I just sketch in a curve. This is basically just, if you imagine like a curve here and then straight up would be a sweetheart neckline, it's just a smoothing of that, like a subtle sweetheart neckline. So really you do just draw in whatever shape you want. Because I'm going to be finishing the neckline with the facing, if you wanted to do scallops, you could do that and finish it with a facing. If you wanted to do, you know, a curve here and a curve here for a like scalped sweetheart neckline, if you wanted to do an angle here, you could do that. If you can do a square, you can do whatever shape you want, especially when you're finishing with the facing. But this is a shape I use quite often, and I do just get asked about it so much. But it's just, you know, you just draw in a subtle curve basically, if you imagine that this is like a sweetheart neckline, it's just curving that out basically. So you just start with a little bit of a V, curve up from there and come in. You can make this more dramatic too, like you could make this come out farther and swoop up more. But this is just kind of the basic line I draw whenever I do this sort of neckline. I just get so many questions about it, and I feel like people think maybe it's hard, but it's just, you know, you can draw in whatever shape you want. So I'm just going to, you know, go over this curve a couple of times and then just slice off that extra piece basically, and then I will modify the back in a to match this in some way. So I'll show you how I fix the back basically so that the shoulder seams will still line up. So there I've just finalized my little neckline curve here and cut off the extra piece. We won't need this anymore. And then I will go ahead and fix the back neckline to match. So of course, the top here, this is still our shoulder seam and our like center sleeve seam. So, you know, things have gotten wonky here, but if we imagine that this is still supposed to line up down here at the end, we can see how far we need to come in on the back neckline as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and line up the shoulder seam here, mark this area, and then draw a new curve in for the back. You could, again, lower this down. You could do the same neckline in the back if you wanted to. I'm just going to pull this curve, probably come down an inch maybe, and just curve it between here and there because I don't really care what the back looks like. I don't do fancy things in the back very often. I did make a dress earlier this year that I did some fancy things to the back, but I haven't done anything else with that recently. So I just went ahead and sketched in this curve. Doesn't, again, really matter. Again, if you wanted to make this scalloped, if you wanted the back to have a sweetheart, if you wanted it to be squared off instead, whatever you want to do back here, just remember that your shoulder seams have to match up. So just make sure that this still will match up perfectly. Otherwise, when you start to sew things, you'll be very upset with yourself. So now that I have the back neckline modified, the front neckline modified, I am going to go ahead and just trace some facings on. Again, I just usually lay some paper under or over, trace down 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches from this curve, and then just draw in a little facing piece, basically just 2.5 inches of fabric all along this area. Obviously it'll be cut on the fold like this center front will be as well. So just go ahead and trace one for the front and then one along the back neckline as well to use as your facing pieces for this bodice. Alright, so now that I have a facing for my front and back of my necklines here, basically the bodice pattern for this particular dress is finished. So I will just set this aside for now and I can start work on making the pattern for the circle skirt. Alright, so to create our circle skirt pattern, we are going to be doing a little bit of math, but really not much because I basically just make the internet do my geometry for me. I could do it's very simple math to find like the radius of a circle if you already have the circumference, but why do geometry when there are calculators on the internet is my answer there. So if I have a 30-inch waist, which I do, that is going to be the circumference of the circle that makes up a circle skirt. So if you look at, like basically the reason it's called a circle skirt is because if you imagine the interior, like if you looked straight down on the skirt and had it opened up, the waist of this skirt is this smaller circle on the inside. That is your waist measurement. So this needs to be 30 inches in the finished dress. Then the outer circle is like how long the skirt is. So if this is your waist, this distance here is this distance here from the waist to the hem. I'm going to make that 30 inches as well. So I'll have a 30-inch circle here and a 30-inch circle out from the waist. Now the large circle, technically the radius of that would be 30 plus whatever this is, plus the radius of this circle. But I just usually just measure out. Once I have this circle drawn, I just measure out 30 inches and draw it in. I don't do any more math after that. So basically I just need to find the radius of 30 inches basically, and I could do that math, or I could type it into a calculator, and the calculator online will tell me that the diameter of a 30-inch circle is the diameter of a 30-inch circle, Jesus, I did it again. The diameter of a 30-inch circle is 9.54 basically, and the radius is 4.77. So basically I'm just going to I'm going to make half of this pattern, and I'm going to draw half of a circle with the radius of 4.77. Now, the way I do my circle skirts, this is how I make mine. Now, again, there are about 1,000 circle skirt pattern tutorials on the internet between blog posts and videos. There are billions of circle skirt patterns, or tutorials basically. I'm just going to be showing you how I do mine, how I like to make circle skirts, what I prefer, you may prefer something else. That's just fine. I'm just showing you my method today. So the way I construct my circle skirts is I make a pattern piece, which is what we're about to do, that looks like this. It's a big half circle here. This is my waist measurement, and I'm going to have, and this is the, if you imagine this is the center front, this is the center back where my zipper will be up into my dress. Now I like having side seams. Some people know, I mean, you can cut a circle skirt on the fold of a wide fabric and then you don't have to have side seams, but I like having them. So we're going to keep them because sometimes I'm using wide fabric, sometimes I'm using a narrower fabric. So I just make my circle skirt pattern with that versatility built in. Whether I need to have side seams or not, I plan for them basically. So I will have side seams on my pattern, which means I can make this interior circle of the pattern itself at 30 inches. Because of these side seams, I will add seam allowance in here because I'm only going to be making the front as a half. So I will go ahead and make this 15 inches basically to be half of my 30-inch waist, and then I will add seam allowance onto this pattern once I have it in place for my side seams. And also I'm going to be thinking about the seam allowance when it comes to considering the back. I will cut the front and the back the same with a extension here. You can also make a front pattern and a back pattern and put that extra allowance in the middle where it's going to need to be for the zipper and do it as like 3 pieces kind of. I just cut these 2 and then fudge it a little bit. I'm noticing I went to go watch a couple of other circle skirt tutorials to see how many people deal with this or explain this. And a lot of people seem to be making ones that have knit so they don't have to care about a zipper. For me, I like having a center back zipper on my garments. I don't like having side zippers. So I'm always going to have a center back seam because I have to put that zipper in there. So my circle skirts always on a dress or by themselves, most of the time, unless I have a super wide fabric and I'm getting tricky, are going to have a center back seam and 2 side seams. That's just how I like to make them. You can make this all in one piece if you want to and have no side seams and just have a center back seam. But that's not how I do it. I do it like this. So this is what my circle skirt will look like when I start to put it together. Basically, I cut 2 halves with seam allowance, and then I will cut one of those halves in half to be the back. But in general, to make the circle skirt pattern, I am going to draw, I have a large piece of my alphanumeric paper here. I've drawn a line straight up, and then I've drawn a line down here straight across. So this is a perfect 90-degree angle here. So I'm going to go ahead and from this point, which is the very center of my circle skirt, if I had a pole running up through the center of my body, which let's not think about that, if I was a dress form, this would be the center point of me, and that is where I will radiate the half circle I need for my waist out from. So I'm going to go ahead and measure the radius of my waist, so 4.77. I'm going to measure up 4.77, out 4.77, out 4.77. Then again, I'm going to measure from here, put a mark here, put a mark here, put a mark here, and then I will just sketch in between those marks to connect and create that half circle that is half of my waist. So it'll be a 15-inch half moon, basically, that is drawn on here that represents half of my waist. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So having marked that 4.77 radius out from my very center point here, I've just gone ahead and sketched in between those little dots that I marked to create that half circle. So of course, if you were to cut 2 of these, it would be a perfect 30 inches here in the middle and fit my waist perfectly. But of course, because of seam allowance, I will be adding on some seam allowance to the edge here. This is the edge of that, you know, from here, boop, to there is 15 inches. So I will need to add on more for my seam allowance. This is going to be the center front of my skirt here, and then also technically will be my center back, will become my center back as well in the end. Well, kind of. Never mind, I'll explain in a minute. So I'm just going to go ahead and measure from this line here, from these points I drew, I'm going to measure out in a straight line 30 inches. So down this line from here at the center front of my skirt, down 30 inches, that will be the center front of my skirt. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that circle out from here. A lot of people will use like, you'll see people use string, or they will put like a pin here and then just swing that out to draw that line. You can get creative to do this in an easier way, I'm just going to go ahead and measure it out and then connect those lines, and I will show you what that looks like. What I've just done is that, so I've just taken that center front line and I've just folded the paper along that center front line so that I just have to do this on a quarter basically of the circle coming out. I will have to add an extension onto here, obviously. Coming out from here, that 30 inches, and then cutting or drawing and cutting in that circle-shaped hem 30 inches out from the waist, of course. Our air conditioner has popped back on again here, but so here's our waist again. Here's that fold where we folded it along the center front, and I'm just measuring out like sun rays from this point to create marks 30 inches out from that point. So this is 30 inches out from the waist. Same along here, along this, you know, original where we were drawing our half circle, this original line here, we want to draw 30 inches out from that too. So 30 inches out every few along the radius of this guy, and then basically you're just going to want to, as many as, you know, if you wanted to fill in, do more dots in between, you can. If you want to do one of those other methods where you string a string or whatever, feel free to get your outer, you know, radius however you want. I'm just going to go ahead and sketch in 30 inches every so often, then I will just sketch in between these lines to create that outer circle. Okay, so now that I have my second big huge circle sketched out, again you'll see this piece of paper on the top here is not actually big enough for that full thing, but I will just fill that in once I have the rest figured out. I'm going to go ahead and actually fold this again down this line here. I'm going to fold it along here just to make sure that that circle is quite even, and then I will go ahead and cut along that outer rim line there. So I just have folded that where the original fold line is to the line of the edge of my pattern. Again, this is seam allowance or extra space. The edge of my pattern is actually in here, so I just fold that into a big triangle, or cone rather, and just making sure that, you know, my circle here is lining up and I haven't messed up anywhere along the way. And then I will go ahead and just cut along this line, the second line I drew here, the one that's 30 inches out from our original waist measurement down here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut along there, and then I will fill in that open piece of paper as well. Okay, so unfolding from that little triangle again, now we have our nice curved hem down here, but of course this piece of paper is doesn't have its extension here because I didn't cut a huge piece of paper because my table is only so big, but I will cut the rest. I'll tape another piece of paper on here, trace this curve from the other side onto it to create our full half circle piece here. Now, I think a lot of times when you see tutorials for circle skirts, it's done with like a short or like a kind of a skater length skirt kind of in mind. So when you are doing one that is a full 30-inch long skirt, which is like, you know, at least a hand's width past knee length, it's quite like a T length almost, it is a massive pattern piece. This is my huge half circle pattern piece here. It's quite giant. Again, this is the original half circle I started with. This measurement is still 15 inches, but now I have a circle spreading out from that first circle that is 30 inches from this point to the hem, from this point to the hem. And that's how big that guy is. He's a large fellow. Now what I'm going to do here is, because this is half of a circle skirt, it's a half circle, as we can sort of see if I back way the hell up here because it's giant. So it's half of my circle skirt. This is the front of my skirt perhaps. Because I intend to have side seams, I do need to add seam allowance here. Now, normally I would just add a ½ inch for seam allowance, but because of this is going to be the pattern for the front and the back of the skirt, and on the back I'm going to want more seam allowance for where the zipper will be. Man, this is going to be so hard to explain later. So what I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to add on 1 inch from this line here, this original line where I started making my pattern. So I'm going to add on 1 inch on either side, which will of course make my skirt like too big, but that is going to be used for seam allowance for the front and backs of my skirt. I will cut that seam allowance differently depending on which piece ends up the front and which piece ends up the back. I will show you when I get to the cutting out the fabric of the skirt what I mean by that. But basically for the pattern piece, I'm just going to add on 1 inch on both this side and this side as basically my seam allowance side seam stuff. I'm adding on 1 inch of ease onto either side here, and then I will explain more about what I'm using that 1 inch for when I get to cutting the fabric of this piece. Where I have that, obviously from this point at the end of my nail to this point along here is 15 inches. So for my 30-inch waist, so that twice, front and back. The extensions here that I just added, this 1 inch here, I'm just going to go draw straight out and square it from that line out. This doesn't have to be like following the circle or anything. It's just going to come squared right out because it's just going to be for seam allowance, for putting a zipper in, things like that. So it can just be on the straight. But I will go ahead and just add seam allowance on the inside of here, a 1/2 inch circle on the inside of that, and then cut out this inner circle part. So I'll show you that. If this is the exact waist measurement, this line is what that represents, then of course we need to add a 1/2 inch of seam allowance to that area. So I'm just going and marking a 1/2 inch in from there and drawing in that 1/2 inch of seam allowance, and then I will go ahead and cut along that line. I will actually going to take this out onto the floor in the bigger area of my house to show you what it looks like in full, because it doesn't fit on this table, that's for sure. I apologize for the noise of the air conditioning stuff behind me. We are in a basement. But here is that pattern piece I just made laid out on top of my fabric. So this is, I think, probably 3 or 4 yards of fabric. Oh, hey, the air conditioner went off. Excellent. I'm not actually even sure how much fabric I have here. I think it's probably 3 yards, 3.5 maybe. I don't remember. I bought it ages ago. Enough, which is good. So we can see this pattern piece does fit on here. Now, if you had super extra wide fabric, you can, like if this was a fold along this, sorry, I shouldn't point with my foot. If this was a fold along here, as opposed to the selvage, you could line this up right along the fold here and cut this all in one big piece. But then you do have to kind of figure out, like if you wouldn't want to cut exactly, you would want to cut it like 1/4 of an inch or a 1/2 inch, the fold beyond that line. So not the full 1 inch of seam allowance, but like halfway in between. I feel like I'm just being more confusing. Hopefully some of this makes sense to some of you. And you could cut it, which is a little bit of extra, that way you had seam allowance again. But because I do not have enough fabric, this isn't on a fold, it's on the selvage, I will be lining this up like so, basically. And I will be cutting 2 very giant pieces here. You can see there's a lot of extra fabric over there, and that's what I will use to cut the bodice. So basically, when I do something like this, I cut out the skirt first, and I only decide to do a circle skirt after I lay a pattern and make sure it fits. You just have to buy a lot of fabric to make these giant pattern pieces fit all at once like this. Of course, you can cut it, like if you imagine, if you cut along that line, you could cut it smaller pieces and like piece a big circle skirt together if you so desire, but it's obviously much easier to buy a wider width fabric or buy a crap ton of fabric and be able to fit these pieces on here all in one piece or in 2 pieces like this, for example. So it's a big, huge circle skirt, but I'm cutting it in halves. So that will be, this fabric is layered. There's a fold along here. So 1, 2 half circles that when sewn together will be a full circle skirt. So I, for some reason, thought this was going to be easy to explain, and I found it a lot harder to explain than I thought I was going to. So hopefully some of that made sense to some of you. Again, there are about 1 billion circle skirt tutorials on the internet, so if this didn't make sense at all, the good news is there are a lot of different other people out there who are explaining it in their own way too, and hopefully one of them will work for you. Really, it's actually quite simple. It's just figuring out the seam allowance stuff that I think is the annoying part. But here's my circle skirt pattern. Again, a pattern like this, you don't have to sew it onto a bodice and make a dress. You could just put a waistband on that and make a circle skirt as well. It's the same exact pattern that I would use to make a circle skirt as well. But I am going to go ahead and cut out my circle skirt here and then show you the difference, like what I do with that 1 inch extension. Basically, I'm going to pin all this down so nothing moves around. Cut those 2 pieces out, and I will show you how I treat the front and the backs a little bit differently when it comes to that 1 inch seam allowance area. This project is testing the limits of being able to video here in this studio because it's kind of cramped when I'm trying to film something this giant. Okay, so I've cut out the 2 pieces of the skirt here using a large area of floor. So I have a skirt front and a skirt back. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take one of these and I'm going to trim off a 1/2 inch from either side, and that will be my skirt front. And I only want it to have 1/2 inch seam allowance, 1/2 inch seam allowance for that front piece. So right now, both of these pieces are the same and have that 1 inch of seam allowance, but I'm going to take one of these off, and I will show you how I trim off a 1/2 inch all along the side seams. So I've taken one of my halves here and just folded it in half itself. So these are where the 1 inch of seam allowance is. I'm just going to go ahead and mark a 1/2 inch in from this edge with some blue chalk. And then I'm going to pin along that edge just so it doesn't move around for me. And I'm going to cut off a 1/2 inch from the edges there. And then I will have the front piece with only a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Instead of this full inch on here, I only need a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off a 1/2 inch from this, along this edge here. So I've just marked that 1/2 inch that I want to cut off of extra seam allowance. And I've just put a couple of pins along that so that while I'm cutting it, it doesn't move around or anything, and I get a 1/2 inch from both sides here. So I've just cut off that 1/2 inch of extra seam allowance that I don't need here, because I don't need to have 1 inch seam allowance along my side seam. So now this front piece, if this is my center front here of the skirt, now the seam allowance on either side for the side seams is only a 1/2 inch, which is perfect. For those wondering, that is sewing machine oil, and I keep it here next to the machines. So if you keep seeing that down there and you're like, what are this? It's sewing machine oil. Random, you know. But for the back of the skirt now, so we have the front. In fact, I've put it over here on our friend Donna to hang for a bit. So that's the front of the skirt over there. But for the other half that I cut out, I'm going to use this for the back of the skirt. Now the back of the skirt is going to have side seams to attach to the front, and then it's going to need to have another split down the center back for the zipper, which is why I added 1 inch to start with, because I want 1 inch down the center back for this skirt. Now what I'm going to do here is, I have it folded just like I just did with the front, and I'm going to, I pinned along the fold this time, because I'm going to cut right along this fold. You can iron this too if you want to really have that fold in there. I'm just going to slip my scissors in here and cut right along this fold so that my back is then in 2 pieces. And then we'll talk about a fun switcheroo I do here. I just went ahead and cut down the center, which would be like the center back of the skirt here. I just went and cut down all along the way. So technically these would be our side seams. That's where that 1 inch, that's where it's straight along here. That's where that 1 inch was added. And this is the center front, center back of this piece. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch that. So while this is the side seam on the pattern, this is where the straight, you know, remember I said straighten out from that circle, these are the original side seam area, that 1 inch extension that we added on. I'm going to now treat this as the center back and treat these as the side seams. If you were to just leave it as is and leave it as fine and use this as the side seam, fine, fine, fine. Nothing disastrous will happen. It's not like crazy different. But this edge is a little bit more curved than this one. Because this has that 1 inch extension that is flat, this is a better area to put the zipper in, basically, because this area here is straight, whereas over here, because this is on the curve, it is a tiny bit curved. Not enough that it will matter with the side seam because it's just going to be a 1/2 inch in. So basically, this was the center back, and now I'm going to treat the former side seam as the center back. I hope that makes sense. I'll try and draw a little diagram and go over it one more time just so you understand what I'm talking about. But I just cut along this fold of the center back, and now I'm going to treat these two as the side seams and treat the former already opened area as the new center back. Yeah, so this is, again, I'm having a whale of a time explaining how I do circle skirts. Who knew? This is such a simple skirt pattern in reality, but to try and explain it to someone else, it sounds like I'm speaking an alien language. So that's great. I'm discovering more and more how not articulate I am, basically. So hopefully this makes sense to some of you. I will try and draw a diagram and see if I can explain it a little bit better as well, but hopefully that makes sense. Like, this was the fold, the center of this half sheet of fabric, and then I cut through the fold, and now these are going to be my side seams, and this will be my center back area where the zipper will go in. Took out those pins from along this where I just cut that open, and I actually am just going to put a pin in either side here on this side to now mark this as my center back. I'm just going to put a pin in there so I will remember that these are the backs, and this is going to be my new side seams. I am going to go ahead and serge the long edges and the waists of both the two back pieces and then the front piece that I already cut over there. And I'm just going to go ahead and serge those with the white thread that's already loaded on here. So I'm just going to serge this edge, and then I will pin and sew the skirt all together. That way I can hang it from Donna, the mannequin here, overnight, and any part of the skirt that wants to stretch out and make the hem wonky can stretch overnight and hang a little bit, so it'll hang all day, all night tonight, and then most of tomorrow while I'm sewing the rest of the dress, and then we can even out the hem and hem it properly. With circle skirts, because of course something this gigantor, part of this is on the straight grain and part of it is on the bias when it hangs, so the bias and the straight grain stretch differently when hanging and via gravity. So you do want a circle skirt to hang for at least a day, possibly longer depending on the fabric, just so that it'll all get stretched out and then you can re-true the hem and then hem it properly. At least that's the proper way to do it. I have skipped that step on dresses in the past, and of course months later we'll regret it, because once it starts hanging in your closet with that hem on there, it will stretch out anyway, whether you stretched it before you hemmed it or after. So it's always good to stretch your circle skirts or let them hang before you hem them. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and serge all these long edges on these back pieces and the front piece, and then I will sew them together. All right, so I went ahead and I serged my edges here, the long edges of my skirt basically. So now this is going to be, this is the side seam of my front piece. This is the new side seam of my back piece, which was originally that center fold. Hopefully we're following along here. I am just going to go ahead and pin along here and sew that side seam, and then do the same for the other side as well. All right, you guys, I'm trying to figure out another visual way to show you what I mean by switching those seams around in the back piece of this. So when you cut out your semicircles, you're cutting out two of them, right? They're identical, one on top of the other. You're cutting out your two circles out of your fabric. This first one is going to be your center front. So you're going to leave that center front intact, and then you're going to trim off that 1/2 inch from the red area, which is, the red here is delineating where we added on that 1 inch seam allowance to the pattern. So I'm going to trim a 1/2 inch off of that, and that'll be our front piece done. And then for the second half circle, the second piece, to create the back piece, we are going to leave that 1 inch along these red sides and cut along the fold in the center of this piece where this blue is, and then this new blue split will now become the side seam that gets attached to the front, and these reds become the new center back seam. Again, so hopefully if it wasn't making sense, that helped a little bit. Again, I'm not sure how best to explain this, obviously. So I have these pieces all, the side seams basically of the skirt pinned together, this side, and I'm going to go ahead and sew those on my straight stitch machine with just some white thread. That way I can hang this skirt on the dress form overnight and let it stretch, or start stretching right now, before I've even cut out the bodice, which I will do tomorrow. Gosh, the skirt looks long here. Maybe I should have gone with 29 instead of 30. But you know what? We can always trim an inch off later. And Donna here, the dress form, is shorter than me. I'm much taller than her, so this isn't as crazy floor length looking as it actually is. So here's the skirt sewn together, the side seam sewn together, and then I've just got it wrapped around the waist here and pinned so that it can hang overnight and stretch out where it needs to and whatnot. And then perhaps when I am truing the hem tomorrow, or late tomorrow, or whenever I end up hemming this, I might cut off another inch, just so it's a little bit shorter. 30 inches is probably a little a little too long. I probably could have gone with 29 so that the finished length would be 28 and a half. That probably would have been a better choice, but in any case, here she is. She's going to hang for the night. I am going to go hang for the night as well. I am done down here for now. Yes, this is a messy sewing room. Please forgive me. All right, it is the next day. Hopefully I'll have a little bit of a clearer head and can explain things a little bit better today than I was doing yesterday. Because last night I think I was a little, you know, incoherent, basically. But today I am cutting out the bodice now. The skirt is still sitting over there hanging as I left it last night. But it's time to cut out the rest of the dress here. So I'm just taking leftover pieces from after I cut out the skirt and using them to fit the bodice onto here. Trying to, you know, use as small or as much of the fabric as possible, or keep as much of it in big pieces as possible in case I want to try and make a bolero out of the extra or something else later on. So I like to keep yardage intact if I can. So I'll take the smaller pieces and try and fit pattern pieces onto those. So that's what I've done here. Of course, these are still, like the front is aligned the same grain direction as the backs are here. These are the backs here. I am just going to cut a little bit extra. This is like a 5/8. This is the center back line. You can kind of see it through the paper. I'm just going to cut a little bit extra here for the back as well. Can't have too much extra down by the zipper in my opinion. But I just have these pinned on here like this. And I just wanted to talk about one thing before I keep going here. And that is that this fabric, this is a cotton sateen, but it does have a little bit of stretch to it. It's hard to show you. But it does not stretch this direction. It only stretches in this direction. So if it's a two-way stretch, I guess. So if it stretches from side to side here, you want that stretch to be across the body, of course, as opposed to up and down. So you want to utilize that stretch in the across your like waist, across the bust, across the hips, because that stretch is going to give it a little bit of comfort. And you want to be able to stretch in the direction, you know, that you as a person may stretch if you say have a large dinner. So just when you're putting your pattern pieces, instead of putting it perpendicular to this, so the stretch would be up and down, you want to have the stretch from side to side on your pattern pieces. So just make sure if you're working with a stretch fabric that the stretch is going in the direction that you would like it to, basically. But I'm going to go ahead and cut out my backs. I'm going to cut out the front. I'm going to find some spare fabric here to cut out the facings as well. And then I will go ahead and sew the darts, or mark and sew the darts on the fronts and backs. I'll probably go into detail on that today because I promised I would go into more detail about how I do darts, so I will do that today. And then I will serge all the edges of the raw edges that need to be serged, basically, to protect the raw edge from fraying. And then I will continue to sew these all together and show you each step as usual. But for now, I just wanted to make that point about the stretch, and I will go ahead and cut these out. So I have my front piece all laid out. You can see how fun that neckline is when it's all out there. And I'm just going to lay my pattern piece exactly on top of the first side here. Just line that all up. And I'm just going to mark here. There are holes punched in the pattern with an awl tool. So there's a little hole punched here, and here. I'm just going to mark through those holes with this pencil and mark those dots onto my pattern on both this side and on the other side. Now I promise there are tiny little marks here from doing that. Ooh, I can't even find it. There and down here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my ruler along there and then use tailor's chalk to just mark in the dart legs. A lot of people don't mark the dart legs and don't like marking up their project and things like that. I don't personally mind. I just think it makes everything easier and faster. And as we know on this channel, I'm lazy. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the dots here and draw in my dart legs on both sides as well. So now those darts look like this. I drew it, a little bit maybe darker than I normally would have, or pressed a little bit harder with the chalk than I normally would have, just so that you guys could see. I don't think blue shows through on white very much. It's kind of the best color to do on white, I think, because crisp white leans blue. I don't know. In my opinion, I think blue is nice to use on white. Of course, you could use yellow and it would be very subtle also. So I'm just going to take these and fold the darts closed, lining up one side on top of the other, and then I will pin them. So I'll show you what that looks like after I've done that. So I'm just going to pin these probably with like 3 or 4 pins closed, and I will talk about that in just a second. Okay, so to pin my darts, I start up here at the point, and make sure that, you know, I've pinned through just where the end of the point is, because I sew from the top of my dart down and I sew right off the edge. So this pin kind of just marks the very tip of where I'm going to run the machine off of the edge. Then these other pins I just stick through along the line, and then it comes out on the line on the other side. Just making sure I have that all lined up and laying quite smooth, and then of course the end of the dart is closed too. As you can see, my pattern drafting isn't perfect. But then I will start sewing up here and sew off the line like so. So I will go ahead and pin the other dart just the same. Basically, I'm just going to do the same procedure on the back, just putting those dots through the pattern with this colored pencil here, and then marking the darts with tailor's chalk, pinning them, etc., etc. And then I will go ahead and I will sew these on the machine before I will sew them, then press them flat, and then I will serge the raw edges of my pieces here. Again, I only serge the edges that aren't going to be eventually encased or something like that. So like for example, well, this one I will serge the edge of the arm, the hem of the sleeve. Wow, I can't think. This is not boding well. I will go ahead. Basically, I'm going to serge every edge of this down alongside the waist, up the center back as well, except for up here at the neckline, because this is going to have a facing and like that's going to be quite contained in there. Nothing's really going to be bothering it, especially after edge stitching. I don't really bother to serge up here at the neckline, so I will serge all the other edges though, just to keep those raw edges encased, although it doesn't really fray much cotton sateen like this, so not too worried, but I like to just have it nice and finished, so I'll do that. I will also go ahead and iron on the inner facing that I'm going to use for these facings, and then serge the raw edges of those two, just as we're going along here and starting to put the bodice together. So I'll mark the rest of these dots, pin those, and I will show you how I sew them when I get over to the machine. Alright, so here I am about to sew a dart here on the back, or one of the back bodices. So I just have the needle lined up at the fat end of the dart here, and I just have the needle lowered down into the fabric here. I will go ahead and remove this pin because the needle is lowered down into it now, so that's holding it firm. And basically, because I've marked these darts, I don't have to like guess or anything. I can just sew right along that chalk line until I come to this point, and I'm just going to sew right off the edge. So hopefully I'll capture that on the other camera, and I'll just show this in real time, then I'll show you what I do with the ends here. I've just sewn as best I could along that little chalk line there, and then I just sewed right off the edge. So I just kept sewing into nothing. And so when you cut the thread off, I just, you know, there's like a little knife here on the edge of the machine, so I just sliced off the ends of my threads here. So there's like it's sort of twisted, this little chain of thread. And I kind of just untwist these and grab, this is of course problematic because I only have one hand. Basically I just take these two threads and tie them in a knot here. Now don't pull too tight or anything, you don't want to like scrunch up this little dart point, but I just like, not loosely, not tightly, just right at the edge here, tie these threads in a knot tie it a couple of times, and then cut off the thread tails, perhaps maybe 5/8 of an inch left, and just leave those little tails in here. These ones off the end. Oh, I did back stitch a little bit at the start also, just to hold those threads, and I will just cut these ones off, and then I will show you how I iron these as well. Alright, so when you are ironing your darts, and make sure you always do press your darts, this is what one looks like unpressed, and here's one after I have gone ahead and pressed it. You do want to make sure like there's not some like grand puckering going on here, because then something has gone wrong, and that will show on the final garment. Luckily this is a really busy print, so mine might not if I had a problem. But you know, your dart is like this. Now some people like to press these like centered almost. So like you have the cone centered over this area. Some people like to cut up the center of a dart and press it open, except for the very end. Personally, I just like to fold them or like lay them down towards the center of the garment. So this is the center back of the garment right here. So I'm going to press these back darts one side, you know, in towards the center of the back. So that's how I'm going to go ahead and press these. Just press them down flat. And then you can see here, technically this just means that my triangle like on the dart before it's sewn is too much on my pattern, which is fine. I'm just going to go ahead and trim this little extra wedge off right here. That way I can serge this bottom edge, serge over this so that it lays down in that thread, captured in the thread of the serger as well. And same with this side, so I will just trim off this little extra bit here to make it lie smooth with the other bit of this. And so once these are all pressed, I will go ahead and serge the raw edges of this. Again, everything except for the neckline and then same. For the front, I will press both those big darts I will press in towards the center front of the garment, and then I will trim them if I need to. Those ones are usually fine. And then serge the raw edges again as usual. This is my facing here. I just went ahead and sewed the back facing to the front facing at the shoulder seam, so I will go ahead and press. I should have serged these first, oops. But I will go ahead and press this open and then serge the rest of this. I'm not worried about this fraying too much, even though I forgot to serge it, because of course it has interfacing like glued onto it now too, and it's not going to get a lot of wear and tear underneath inside there, so it should be fine. But I will go ahead and serge the other edges of this guy. And then, well, do I want to serge this edge? I won't serge the inner edge. The edge that's going to get sewn to the neckline, just like the neckline, I'm not going to bother serging it. I don't want a lot of bulk in there, and it will be edge stitched down. So there'll be a couple lines of stitching in it, and I'm not too worried about it fraying or anything, basically. But the outer edge of the facing I will serge as well. So just going to go ahead and do those next few steps now. Say that on the front here too, so you can see the darts create a lot more shaping up here because I'm dealing with the bust, whereas on the back we are not. So my larger darts here, I've got them pressed in towards the center front, which will be here, and so I'm just going to put a little pin to hold that area flat so that when I serge this bottom edge, those get caught in that serging and then they won't flap around or move around. When I sew my bodice to my skirt later, everything will just lay smooth and like I have it pressed here. again, like last time in the last video I did, this has that kimono sleeve again, so it has this curve at the underarm once again. And last time I talked about several different ways to reinforce this area. This time I did just go ahead and do a second line of stitching over that area once again, and then I will just go ahead and clip into here. And that's all actually I'm going to do for this one. I'm not going to do the extra steps that I did last time, just because I have many sateen dresses with this style sleeve, and I know that it doesn't really come apart, and I trust that it'll be fine through several washings and several years, because I have dresses like this and all I ever did was clip this seam and it's always been fine. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that for this one. I think that should be just fine for this dress. Again, if you want to do some extra special steps down here and really reinforce this area, check out my last video where I did a few other things to reinforce this area in general. But I'm just going to go ahead and clip into this curve, and then I will go ahead and press the seam open. So again, the outside of this kimono sleeve underarm area will lay nice and flat if you cut that seam open. So put clips into that curve right up to the seam line, and then it will be able to be pressed nice and flat on the outside, basically. Now, you'll remember from when we were pattern drafting, when I was pattern drafting this, I left that 1 inch here and made sure I squared off 1 inch up here, and that's so that I could just simply turn this inside 1/2 inch all the way along here, and then sew it down. I don't know if I want to hand stitch that or machine stitch. I think I'll hand stitch it. So I'm just going to go ahead and iron and pin this all so that it's a 1/2 inch inside like that. Iron all the way along, and then I will just do one of my little long and short stitches that I do all the time here, and just hem this edge with a like a quite invisible hand stitch, just to sew that 1/2 inch down on the inside all the way around the sleeve to hem the sleeve, and I will do the same for the other sleeve as well. Here's what that sleeve hem looks like turned inside. I've just got it pinned a 1/2 inch in, turned in, and there's room to do that because I left that inch and squared it off up here as well, so that there's no weird nonsense going on. So I can go ahead and just stitch this down. Basically it's going to be like a long stitch on this side and then a tiny stitch that shows on this side, and just go along and hand stitch it all down with some white thread. Alright, so my sleeves are all hemmed here. You can just see I have longer stitches on the inside and then little tiny stitches that get lost in the print for sure here on the outside, and then I just have that pressed all down so it's all nice and ready to go. So the sleeve end is done there, and now I'm going to go ahead and finish this neckline by attaching our neckline facing here. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin this to the right sides together and pin the facing on, and then go ahead and sew that. You just want to, follow along 1/2 inch, come down here, turn, come back up, just follow along that 1/2 inch edge, just following that curve though. And then again, we are going to clip into this, clip these curves so that it can be all pressed nicely. Always clip your curves, you guys. Clip your curves here, clip your curves here, and then I will do some edge stitching along this facing to keep it inside as well, or understitching. I call it edge stitching. I think it's technically understitching when it's on a facing like this, but whatever. It's the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this on, sew this facing on, clip my curves, iron it, edge stitch, all that jazz, and I'll see if I can get any of that on camera for you as well. And so that's my next step here. To clarify something with you guys while I'm sewing this. So I'm just sewing, I've sewn one side of the neckline all the way up. This is the center front of the neckline. You can't really tell, but that's the center point of the neckline. So I've sewn all the way down to that point, and then instead of like trying to zoom around, you just leave the needle in the fabric, lift the presser foot, and then turn this so that you can maneuver out of that tiny like V basically. So you come Oops, sorry. So you come and move this around and maneuver out of that tiny V and put your presser foot back down, and then you can keep sewing this other side, basically. That's kind of how you get into that tight V if you've never had to do something like that before. If you're newer to sewing, that's kind of how you maneuver out of that one, just to keep that sharp point at the very front of the neckline, which is right underneath here where that needle is still sitting inside the point, basically. That's how you get that sharp point down in there. You just go ahead and leave the needle down in the fabric, lift the presser foot, and then turn it around, and then put the presser foot back down where you need it to be. Okay, so my facing is sewn on, right sides together. You can see that 1/2 inch line of stitching coming in here, and where that meets a sharp point here in the center front of the neckline. So because there are lots of curves going on here, you are going to want to clip along these seams. Now remember, when it's an out curve like this, you want to clip away little triangles. You're going to clip out little triangles, literally. And when it's in an inside curve like this, you can just clip into it. So I'm going to go ahead and clip all along this area, and then I'll show you what it looks like after I've done my clipping that I want to do, basically. And I am going to cut straight down from here right to this point as well. So I've seen guides that say only clip every 1/2 inch, which I think this is probably a little bit under 1/2 inch, but I just want to make sure that this little curve here in my sweetheart-ish curvy neckline is really nice and smooth. So I've just clipped little triangles out of that side, and then for the rest of this, because it curves the other direction, I've just put little snips. Same on the back, because that back neckline curves as well. And then so I'm just going to do the same exact sort of clipping to this other side as well. So once that seam is all snipped, you can turn your facing into the inside here and start being able to press your neckline down. But what I'm going to do, instead of just simply starting to, and you can see this lays nicely because that clip is all pointed, I'm actually going to add some edge stitching along here, or understitching along here first before I even bother trying to press this down. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back in the machine and just sew a line of stitching to hold this seam allowance down onto the facing so that it all folds over really nice and smooth here, and I can press it really nicely. So because those curves are clipped in there and there's this nice little line of edge stitching or understitching here, I can go ahead and just press my neckline all nice so it's going to be super smooth on the front and very finished on the inside here as well. This stays pretty well. I don't even need to tack this down. I'm not going to bother. I will tack it down here at the shoulder seam, I guess. Up here at the neck, I'll tack this to this eventually. Usually I do that kind of thing when I'm finishing this raw edge once I put the zipper in, which of course is what's coming next now. So I'm just going to give this all a nice good press and make sure everything's sitting nicely, and then I will go ahead and sew the bodice to the skirt here, which is still sitting over here hanging on Donna. Pink vase from Ikea over there, hanging on the floor. I might need to straighten this room a little bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and sew this skirt onto this bodice once I've got it nice and pressed and ready to go. Wondering, here's what the outside of the neckline looks like. So all nice and smooth because of that care we took inside the facing. So nice smooth point here in the front and all that jazz. Alright, so I've sewn the bodice and the skirt together at the waist now, and I'm going to, just going to go ahead and put in our zipper. So the way I usually do this, of course, is to sew up the back seam. So I'm just going to use a large stitch length, like a basting stitch length, to stitch the back seam from the neck down past the waist, down to where the end of the zipper will be. I usually put two similar colored pins together to like indicate to myself where that's going to be. So I just have this regular zipper here. I don't like invisible zippers, you may have noticed. So it's just going to be the length of the zipper is where I'm going to put basting stitches from there up, large stitch length, and I'm just basically putting that line of stitching in there so that I can press that seam and it'll iron both sides perfectly for me, which is nice. And then from this point of the end of the zipper down, I'm going to sew that with a regular stitch length, so something like small, like a 2 on my machine, so a small normal stitch length just to sew the rest of that seam shut. And then I will pull the basting stitches out after I've pressed this and then put my zipper in, and I'll show you how I do that again as per usual. But I'm going to go ahead and sew that basting stitch in there and then the rest of that seam down. So I've got the right side sewn together. You can see how this is a larger stitch length here, and then it switches over just here to a smaller stitch length for the rest of the seam. So I'm just going to go ahead and open this dress up on the ironing board here and then press this back seam open all the way along the seam, and then I will start taking out this basting stitch after it has been ironed open like that. Okay, so now that my seam is ironed open, it's going to give me nice crisp edges up here to sew down onto my zipper. So what I'm going to do is go and find that area where it switches over again and take out the larger stitch length now that this is nice and ironed down. So that seam is pressed nicely, and I'm just actually going to remove the basting thread that's holding it closed, because of course we don't want it closed until we have our zipper in there. And then I will show you how I put my zipper in. So I've removed the basting stitches from that part up here to the neckline up here, and I'm just going to go ahead and sew in my first side of my zipper. So to do that, I'm basically going to line up this nicely pressed edge with the edge of the teeth here. Then I'm just going to sew along that edge here along the teeth as best I can, as even as I can, getting it right close up next to the teeth. You don't want to, if you look at a zipper, whoop, there's like this raised area here. You don't want to catch that, but you do want to just be kind of as close as you can be. Sorry if my nails are a little dirty here. Thus, being in the sewing studio all day. But you just want to sew as close to that edge as you can without getting stuck in this raised area. So you want to stay down here, but I'm just going to sew all along that edge. I will show you what that looks like over on the machine, basically, but this is going to be lined up down here, and then you sew really close to the edge on this side, and then the other side will be the side that is lapped over and hides all the zipper and all that nonsense. So first we have to sew this one side down though. Alright, here I am over at the sewing machine, and of course I'm just going to leave my regular presser foot in, because while I do have a zipper foot, promise, I don't care to change it. I don't find that my results differ that much doing it my way with a regular presser foot, so I just leave it like this. And basically I'm just going to stitch a line of stitching right here along the edge, holding this edge down onto the zipper tape basically. So I'm just going to stitch all along here, sewing on top, basically lining up. See that little line there? That's where the needle normally is. I've got it moved over a little here so that it's off from that line, but that line kind of I'm centering over the zipper teeth, and then I've got the needle off to the side, so it should hit all along right here and sew all along the zipper here so that this side is just smoothly up against the teeth. Alright, so now that I've got one side sewn down to the zipper, this close side here, I'm going to take this other side and pin it so that it just covers that line of stitching basically, and it lays smooth, of course. Down here where like the zipper starts underneath here, you really just kind of slide it over just a little bit, coax it over. There's a piece of extra thread here. And then I'm just going to put a pin through here and pin it all along here so that it's just overlapping that area, and then I will go ahead and sew along the zipper teeth on this side just with that same presser foot, getting the needle as close as I can to here. Of course, again, I could get closer if I used that zipper foot instead of my regular one, but I don't care. So I'm just going to use the regular seam, regular presser foot, and just sew all along the other side so that this becomes a little lapped zipper, and then our zipper will be in. Okay, so unfortunately, people in this house were playing loud copyrighted music for a bit there, upstairs, and I didn't want to have it in the background, so I wasn't able to talk about this. But what I just did was I smoothed my facings down, and I just am stitching. This side really didn't turn out very pretty. This side's better. But I just hand stitched everything down so that on the inside, the facing lies smooth up here where my zipper is. And so now my whole closure area is all done. I might put a hook and eye here still as well, but it actually, when the zipper is already all the way pulled up, it actually sits quite nicely. So I might not even do a hook and eye up here, but I'll probably add it later. We'll see how lazy I'm feeling as usual. But I just was pinning this all down to lay smooth and then hand stitching it down to the zipper so that everything lies all nice up here. And now I'm going to start working on the hem of this dress, but in order to do that I am going to go ahead and try this dress on and have actually a friend of mine, aka my mom, look at the hem and see if she thinks it needs to be evened out, because we did let it hang overnight there, and technically I'm sure that there's probably some stretch going on, so I just want to make sure I don't need to even it out or true the hem again, and if so I will have her hopefully help me pin that, and so I can cut the hem again and then hem it. I think I am going to leave it as it is long. The skirt is 30 inches, and yesterday I was thinking it might be too long, but I think it's kind of nice to have a longer T-length dress too, just for some variety. So I think I'm just going to leave this one, and then I will cut my pattern down by 1 inch for next time, just because this is on the longer side, but that's okay. Okay, so I tried on this dress, and I had someone look at the hem to see if it was hanging pretty straight or not. It looked like it was okay. They said it looked perfect. I highly doubt that it's perfect after hanging overnight like that. I'm sure it stretched out just a little bit, but not enough that apparently it's noticeable, unless that person is lying to me. Let's hope not. But so hopefully that means that the hem will be okay to go ahead and have me finish it. In an ideal world, I'd have, you know, a couture seamstress friend who could come and true all my hems for me while I'm wearing the dress, but I can't always rope someone into helping me. So they said it looked okay. Hopefully it's going to look okay. I'm going to go ahead and hem it. Usually my cotton sateen dresses and skirts, like all my circle skirts I have, I don't think I really had to true any of them. Usually cotton sateen behaves pretty well. It doesn't stretch out too much, but it is important to remember that some fabrics are a looser weave and they are going to stretch out a lot more hanging, and you might want to leave them for 48 hours as opposed to 12 or whatever I ended up hanging mine. You might want to leave it hanging for a bit longer and really true those hems, because depending on the fabric, they can really stretch out quite wonky, but usually cotton sateen is a firm enough weave structure that it doesn't get too crazy. So I hem my circle skirts using double fold bias tape. This is just double wide fold bias tape from Joann's. And what I've done here is I have just, it comes like this folded, and I've just ironed it opened, pressed it open a little bit, and I've sewn a couple packages together. It's 2 1/4 packages of this stuff from Joann's is what makes up a circle skirt hem usually for me. So it's about, oh, I don't know, I think each package of this stuff is 3 yards long. So it's like many feet around, basically. So I usually try and sew 3 packages of this together to create one really long ribbon. And then I pin it all around my skirt, pinning it to the right side of the skirt. I'm just going around and pinning it all along here. Once I get to the, I've gone all the way around now. So what I'm going to do is fold this over so it's finished. And then just make sure it overlaps maybe like 5/8 of an inch. And I'll cut off the extra. And then I will sew all along this little ditch here. So I will sew, it's a little shy of a 1/2 inch basically. It's like 0.4 of an inch maybe. I will sew in this little ditch all the way around the hem, and then I will turn this to the inside, kind of like so. And this will be sewn here, and then I will hand stitch this little fold down to the fabric here. And so there will be just tiny little stitches on the outside, and then the stitches on the inside are hidden within the fold of this bias up here. I do have a video where I show or talk about this technique that I will link in a card here as well. Just different seam finishes and showing how I do this technique that I use to hem all my circle skirts as well. But I'm just going to go ahead and finish pinning this and then sew all the way around. Boom, it'll probably be the rest of my thread on my bobbin if I had to guess. I'll be surprised if I don't run out. And so I'm just going to sew machine stitch all the way around this skirt, the many yards of this skirt, and then I will go ahead and turn this inside and press the hem all smooth, and I'll show you what that looks like, and then I will have to hand stitch it down. All right, so once you have your bias sewn onto the outside of the skirt, basically you're going to come in here to the inside, flip that over, and so this, once you come in here, starts to become this. And I'm just going to go ahead and press this. This is probably 2/16, otherwise known as 1/8 of an inch-ish here that I'm allowing to be curled over, just so that I can make this a little bit shorter. You can go right up against the edge if you'd like, or you can come up a little bit more if you'd like. I'm just going to go ahead and do this like 1/8, like so, all the way around. I've got it turned where that piece meets over here, so it's got folded edge, so it's all nice and smooth. But I'm just going to come and I'm going to pin all around my hem after I've pressed it nicely, and then I will hand stitch this fold down through my hem here to create the finished hem, and it'll be all nice and clean on the outside and all nice and clean on the inside. Dress is over there. Basically it's done except for the pockets I was thinking of adding. So originally I had thought about doing possibly 1 or 2 pockets on the skirt. I am a little afraid because this pattern is so busy now that I see it as a dress that it's just going to get lost in there and you won't really even see a pocket. So I think I'm going to make one, and in that way I will be showing you how I make the pocket, if you were to want to make pockets for something like this yourself. And then I will pin it onto the dress and take a look at it, maybe try it on with the pocket and see if I like it, and then decide whether or not I want to actually sew it on. I might end up leaving this as it is, but I figure since I promised you pockets, I will show you how I would go about making a pocket, and then I'll pin it onto the dress and see if I actually want to sew it on. And then maybe we can have a vote in the comments and see if you guys think I should add the pocket or not. And that is how we are going to arrange this pocketing situation. And so I'm going to go ahead and like pin this onto the dress and see, again, I think really you're just going to only be able to see the white part of the pocket anyway. It's going to get so lost in here. What's the point? But I will pin it on and I will try on this dress and you can tell me, should I attach the pocket or not? All right. That's going to be our last little task of the evening before I try this dress on for you and show you how it came out. So here it is with the pocket pinned on, so you can kind of get an idea of what that might look like. So let me know, and then with the pocket off here as well. So let me know in the comments below what you think I should do. Should I add the pocket? Should I put another one? Should I do a different pocket? Should I do no pockets? What's your opinion on this? I think the print is pretty busy, so I think I don't really need to add anything else to this. It's just kind of going to get lost in my opinion, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below as usual. And thank you as always for sticking with me through yet another summer sewing project here. I hope you like how the dress came out. I certainly do. I know it's not the most flattering of colors on me, this sort of tan color kind of blends right into my skin, but we all know how much I love tans and beiges and safari kind of colors. So this is right up my street really, even if it doesn't flatter me the most compared to other brighter or deeper colors, I should think. But I like it anyway. Of course, if they did this print on a black instead of a white background, I would be all over that too, because I love a floral on a black background. But pocket or no, thank you for sticking with me through yet another summer sewing project here, the last of my planned projects for the year. Of course, I do have that one other sort of viewer's choice project that I left up to you guys, and I think it was pretty clear what you wanted to see, or what many of you want to see, not even only in comments left on that video, but on many of my videos. Something that I have a few of that I have no way to really give you the pattern, or I have no pattern to recommend to you, so I'll just show you how I would go about making it, and hopefully that will help at least some of you until I can get my own pattern line going. Again, I do hope to do that someday. I'm just not in a financial position to be able to do it yet, guys. I really wish I had the time and the capital to do that, and I hope we'll be able to I hopefully will be able to figure it out soon. I'm not quite there yet. But please bear with me. I will have a really fun project to finish out this summer sewing series, something a lot of you have requested to see. So I'll be doing that one next, but I have to wait for the fabric to come in because it is on order. I had to order a fabric that I wanted particularly for it. So I will be waiting for that fabric to come in, and then I will do my last summer project for all of you. But I hope you enjoyed seeing this project today, this fun dress. I always love doing a 1950s full skirted dress like this because it's just so much fun swanning around in them. But thank you as always for watching today, and I will see you again here on the channel real soon. Bye.